Family, let me tell you something. Sometimes life will take you so low that it feels like death itself. You'll lose your breath, your joy, your fight, and in that place you think it's over. But I came to tell you, death ain't always the end. Sometimes it's the doorway to revelation. And when I found myself in that dark space, Jesus revealed something that completely shifted the way I see speaking in tongues. And baby, what he showed me will shock you. I thought tongues was just noise. I thought it was for the overly deep church folks who wanted to sound spiritual. But when I died to myself, when the weight of depression, shame, and failure laid me flat, God whispered something. He said, "Daughter, tongues is not about noise, it's about survival. See, when you don't have words, when grief has stolen your language, the Spirit intercedes with groans too deep for comprehension." That's Romans 8:26, and I realize that speaking in tongues is not me performing for heaven, it's heaven performing surgery on me. You think it's gibberish. No, it's oxygen, it's CPR for the soul, it's heaven's language bypassing my broken mind to reach the throne of grace. I died to the performance, I died to the pressure, and in that death, God resurrected a new understanding, that the Spirit's language is not about sounding holy, it's about surviving the moments when you don't know how to pray. Family, let me talk to you for a moment about this thing called dying. Not the funeral, not the casket, not the kind of dying that puts your body in the ground. I'm talking about that spiritual dying, the kind where God lets certain parts of you expire so he can resurrect the parts of you that he intended all along. See, some of us keep wondering why the same doors are closed, why the same people left, why the same opportunities slipped through our fingers. And we're thinking the enemy has all this power over us, but sometimes it's not the enemy shutting those doors, it's God saying, that part of you has to die before I can show you what I've been trying to reveal. I remember seasons where I thought I had it all figured out. I had my own plan, my own timing, my own agenda, and then life came swinging, and before I knew it, I was laid out flat on the ground with no backup plan. It felt like death. It felt like the end. But what I didn't realize in that moment is that what was dying wasn't me. It was my pride. It was my performance. It was my need to be in control. God said, "Daughter, I can't pour new wine into old wineskins. Something has to break. Something has to die. See, we want revelation without death. We want clarity without surrender. We want to hear God's secrets while still clutching our ego, our reputation, our titles." But God said, if you want revelation, you've got to be willing to release. Revelation comes in the burial ground. It comes in the quiet after the storm. It comes when you stop fighting to prove who you are and start asking God, "Who do you say that I am?" And can I tell you this? Dying to self doesn't always look pretty. It doesn't always happen on a Sunday morning with worship music playing softly in the background. Sometimes dying to self is you crying in your car because you know you've outgrown the version of you that everybody still expects you to be. Sometimes it's walking away from circles that feel comfortable but aren't growing you. Sometimes it's shutting your own mouth when you want to clap back because you've decided you'd rather have peace than be right. Oh, I know I'm talking to somebody right now. Because when God starts asking you to die to yourself, he's not punishing you, he's pruning you, and pruning is painful, it's uncomfortable. But if you've ever watched a gardener work, you'll notice they only cut back what has the potential to bloom again. They don't waste time cutting dead things that can't grow. They cut living branches that, if trimmed properly, will produce even greater fruit. That's what dying to self is. God saying, I'm cutting you back so you can bloom bigger. I'm stripping you now so you can shine later. I'm letting this die so that something greater can live. It took me a while to understand that. Because when I was in that place, all I could see was loss. I felt empty. I felt abandoned. I felt like God had forgotten me. But then, when I leaned into the silence, when I stopped trying to fight the death and instead surrendered to it, God started speaking. And what he revealed was that I was never forgotten. I was being prepared. I was never abandoned, I was being set apart, and what felt like the grave was actually the womb. A dark place, yes. A lonely place, yes. But a place where new life was forming, and that's why I tell you that dying to self brings revelation, because it's in the breaking that you hear his voice clearer. It's in the surrender that you see his hand stronger. Some of y'all are still holding on to a version of yourself that God is trying to bury, and you're wondering why you feel stuck. But the moment you release, the moment you say, God, I don't have to be in control. God, I don't need the approval. God, I just need you. That's when revelation floods in like light breaking through the darkness. When I was at my lowest, Jesus whispered to me, I had to let that die so you could live. And that's the paradox of this walk. You don't really live until you learn how to die. You don't really see until you learn how to let go of your own vision. You don't really hear until you quiet down the noise of your own ego. That's when he starts to reveal mysteries that your natural mind could never grasp. That's when he shows you that tongues isn't just church tradition, it's survival. That's when he teaches you that grace isn't just a sermon point. It's the oxygen in your lungs when you should have suffocated in shame. So I dare you today, stop resisting the death. Let the old you go. Let the old patterns die. Let the old mindset expire, because when you do, revelation will meet you in the ashes. God will show you who you are, and more importantly, he will show you who he is. And you will realize that what you thought was the end was really just the beginning of everything he had in mind for you. Family, can I be honest with you? For years, I thought speaking in tongues was a show. I thought it was something church folks did to sound deep, to sound holy, to make sure everybody in the room knew they were connected. And because of that, I stayed away from it. I said that ain't for me. That's not how I connect to God. I'll just pray in English. I'll just sing my worship songs. I'll just cry my tears. But what I didn't understand at the time was that I was treating a lifeline like a performance. And as long as I kept calling it a show, I was rejecting the very thing God wanted to use to keep me alive. See, I didn't learn what tongues really meant when life was good. I didn't learn it when my bank account was full, when my family was smiling, when I was posting cute pictures on Instagram. No, I learned it when I couldn't breathe. I learned it when my words failed me. I learned it when my heart was too broken to articulate a prayer. I learned it in the moments when depression came knocking, when shame wrapped itself around my throat, when grief stole every syllable out of my mouth. That's when I realized tongues was never meant to be a performance. It was survival. Romans 8:26 says, Likewise the Spirit helps us in our weakness, for we do not know what to pray for as we ought, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. Family, that's survival. That's not God saying, show me how spiritual you are. That's God saying, when you have nothing left, I will speak for you. Tongues is heaven stepping in when earth is collapsing around you. I'll never forget one night when I was so low that all I could do was lay on the floor. I had no song, I had no scripture, I had no words, I had only tears, and right there, with my face on the carpet, something started bubbling up. It wasn't English, it wasn't fancy, it wasn't even understandable, but it was survival. It was my spirit reaching for the Father when my flesh couldn't, and can I tell you something? Peace rushed in that room like a flood. Strength showed up where weakness had been sitting heavy, and I realized in that moment, this isn't about me trying to look spiritual. This is about me letting the Spirit rescue me. We've got to stop making tongues about looking the part. We've got to stop turning it into a competition. Who can pray louder, who can shout longer, who can sound the most spiritual. That's performance, and performance will wear you out. Performance will have you pretending in public but broken in private. Performance will have you fluent in tongues on Sunday but silent in despair on Monday. Tongues is not performance, tongues is survival, and when you really understand that, you stop worrying about who's watching you, who's judging you, who's dying you. You realize, baby, this isn't for you. This is for me. This is my spirit talking to my God, and if you don't understand it, that's all right. It wasn't for you to understand anyway. See, survival doesn't always look polished. Survival doesn't always sound pretty. When you're drowning, you don't care how you look when you reach for the lifeboat. You don't care if your hair is messy, if your clothes are soaked, if your voice is cracking. You just want to live, and that's what tongues is. It's the Spirit throwing you a lifeline when you're too weak to swim. It's God breathing through you when you've run out of air. It's the language of survival. And maybe that's why so many people miss it, because they're still trying to perform. They're still trying to be perfect. They're still trying to impress God with their vocabulary. But you don't have to impress God. He already knows you. You don't have to perform for him. He already chose you. All he needs is your surrender. All he needs is for you to say, I don't have the words, God, so you can speak through me. That's when survival kicks in. That's when the Spirit begins to intercede with groans too deep for words. I need somebody to catch this. Tongues is not about hype, it's about healing. It's not about theatrics, it's about therapy. It's not about being seen, it's about being saved. And the moment you stop worrying about performance and start leaning into survival, you'll discover a power you didn't know you had. You'll realize that even when you're wordless, you're never voiceless. Because heaven always has a way of finding expression through you. So the next time you find yourself too broken to pray, too weak to form a sentence, too heavy to articulate your pain, remember this: you don't have to perform. You don't have to pretend, just open your mouth. Just let the Spirit move. Just allow heaven to take over. Because this is not about a show, it's about your survival. And if you've ever survived something that should have killed you, then you already know. Sometimes the only reason you made it out was because the Spirit spoke for you when you couldn't speak for yourself. Family, I've got to tell you something that shook me when God revealed it. Heaven has a language that doesn't need permission from your limitations. See, you and I, we live in this world with boundaries. Boundaries of vocabulary, boundaries of knowledge, boundaries of what our mind can process and what our tongue can articulate. But the Spirit, the Spirit doesn't operate in those boundaries. The Spirit doesn't need your grammar, your dictionary, or your explanation. The Spirit has a language that goes beyond human limits, and that language is what we call tongues. I used to think that if I couldn't understand it, it couldn't be real. Isn't that just like us? We think if we can't explain it, it doesn't make sense. If we can't break it down, it must not be valid. But baby, can I tell you, there are some moves of God you'll never be able to explain. There are some moments with him that are too deep for comprehension. There are some breakthroughs that bypass your logic, your reasoning, your intellect. That's when heaven steps in with its own language, because if you could explain it, you might try to control it. If you could define it, you might try to limit it. But God said, I'll speak in a way that bypasses your understanding so that you know this ain't about you. It's about me. You ever been in a place where your human words just weren't enough? You tried to pray about it, but English fell flat. You tried to describe your pain, but language betrayed you. You tried to articulate your hope, but every word sounded too small. That's because human language has limits. Human language is tied to human comprehension, but tongues breaks the boundary line. Tongues is heaven saying, I will not be boxed in by your limits. I will not be reduced to your vocabulary. I will not be confined to your understanding. And isn't that just like God? He has always spoken in ways that confuse man but glorify him. He spoke through a bush that burned but wasn't consumed. He spoke through a donkey when a prophet wouldn't listen. He spoke through dreams and visions, through storms and whispers, and when he poured out his Spirit, he said, Now I'm going to speak through tongues, a language that isn't confined to your natural mind. Because sometimes your spirit knows what your mind hasn't caught up with yet. Sometimes your soul is crying out for things your lips don't even have the words to request, and in that gap, heaven's language steps in. This is why the enemy doesn't want you to embrace tongues, because as long as you're confined to your own words, you're confined to your own limits. As long as you're stuck in your vocabulary, you're stuck in your understanding. But the moment you release and let heaven's language flow, you step outside of human limits and into divine power. The enemy can understand English. He can understand Spanish. He can understand your cries, your complaints, your doubts. But when you shift into tongues, oh, you've entered a realm he can't decode. You've tapped into a hotline that goes straight to the throne room of heaven. You've activated a channel that bypasses your flesh, bypasses your doubt, bypasses the enemy's interference, and goes straight to God. And here's the thing, you don't have to understand it for it to work. That's where humility comes in. That's where surrender comes in. Because some of us, we like control too much. We want to know every detail, every step, every meaning. But God says, do you trust me enough to let me pray through you in a way you don't understand? Do you trust me enough to let me work beyond your limits? Do you trust me enough to let your spirit take the lead? That's the invitation of tongues. I remember a time when I was praying for something specific and I kept hitting a wall. I was asking, I was begging, I was pleading, but it felt like my prayers were bouncing off the ceiling, and then I shifted into tongues. And can I tell you, something broke, something shifted. I didn't know what I was saying, but I knew heaven understood. And later, when the answer came, when the breakthrough showed up, I realized that heaven's language had been working behind the scenes, bypassing my human limit, securing what my human words couldn't. That's why I'm telling you today, don't despise what you don't understand. Don't reject tongues because it doesn't make sense. Don't push it away because your logic can't grasp it. Embrace it. Lean into it. Because heaven's language is designed to do what your human language cannot. It's designed to carry prayers too heavy for your vocabulary. It's designed to release power too great for your intellect. It's designed to move mountains that your words couldn't budge. So the next time you feel the Spirit stirring you, don't silence it because it feels unfamiliar. Don't shut it down because it feels uncomfortable. Open your mouth and let heaven bypass your limits, because in that moment you're stepping into a divine exchange. You're letting God's Spirit speak mysteries into your life, declare victories you haven't seen yet, cancel attacks you don't even know are coming. That's heaven's language, and it was never meant to be confined to human limits. And family, that's the beauty of it. That God, knowing our weaknesses, knowing our limitations, didn't leave us stuck in them. He gave us a way out. He gave us a language that surpasses understanding, that bypasses flesh, that tears through the veil and connects us straight to Him. And if you'll let it, if you'll surrender to it, you'll discover a power that no human boundary could ever contain. You ever been in so much pain that words just don't work? You ever been so broken that language betrayed you? You tried to pray about it, but every sentence crumbled before it left your lips. You tried to explain it to somebody, but every word felt too small for the weight you were carrying. You ever just sat in silence with tears rolling down your face because your soul was speaking a language your tongue couldn't keep up with? That right there is where Romans 8:26 comes alive. The Spirit helps us in our weakness, for we do not know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit Himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. Family, those groans are not weakness. Those groans are not failure. Those groans are heaven's alarm system saying, "She can't pray right now, but I've got her." Those groans are the Spirit stepping in when you've reached the end of yourself. Because let's be honest, there are some things you can't articulate. How do you put the loss of a loved one into a sentence? How do you compress years of disappointment into a neat little prayer? How do you tell God about the pain you can't even admit to yourself? That's why the Spirit says, don't worry about the words, I'll carry this for you. I used to think my prayers had to be perfect. I thought God wanted eloquence, long words, impressive phrases. I thought prayer was about performance. But then I found myself broken. I found myself on the bathroom floor with no words left, and I thought I was failing at prayer. I thought God wouldn't hear me because I couldn't form a sentence, but right there, in the silence, I felt His presence. Right there, in the groans, I realized I wasn't alone, and God whispered to me, "It was never about your words. It was always about your heart, and I can hear groans louder than I can hear grammar. See, sometimes your groan is the most honest prayer you'll ever pray. Sometimes the sigh you release when you don't know what else to say is the most powerful intercession heaven has ever heard. Sometimes the moan that escapes your chest while you're trying to keep it together is the Spirit moving through you, translating your pain into purpose. Don't you dare dismiss your groan. Don't you dare think God can't interpret your silence. Heaven has been fluent in groans since the beginning of time. Look at Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. The Bible says He groaned, He wept, He sweated drops of blood. That wasn't polished, that wasn't pretty, that was raw, that was survival, that was surrender, and heaven responded. Angels came and strengthened Him in His weakest moment. That same Spirit is still working today. The same way Jesus groaned and God answered, you can groan and God will respond. And here's the thing, the groan is not just about pain. Sometimes the groan is about birthing. Ask any woman who has carried a child. Groaning is part of delivery. Groaning is what pushes the promise out. Groaning is what makes space for new life. And when your spirit starts groaning, sometimes it's not because you're dying, it's because you're birthing. You're pushing out old seasons. You're laboring for new strength. You're delivering destiny, and yes, it hurts. Yes, it feels overwhelming, but those groans are heaven's announcement. Something new is coming through you. So don't let the enemy shame you for your groans. Don't let religion tell you that if you don't have the words, you don't have the prayer. Don't let your own mind convince you that silence means failure. Baby, silence is sacred. Tears are prayers, groans are intercession. And when you don't have the language, God says, I'll take your sound, I'll take your sigh, I'll take your tears, I'll take your groans. I'll take all of it and translate it into heaven's language. There was a time I thought my groans were weakness, but now I understand they are evidence of intimacy, because you don't groan in front of strangers. You don't break down in front of just anybody. Groaning requires trust. Groaning means you feel safe enough to let the real you show up, and when you groan before God, it's proof that you trust Him with the rawest version of you, and He honors that. He leans in closer. He says, "Daughter, I can work with that. And can I tell you something?" Sometimes the groan in private is what gives you strength in public. Sometimes the sound you release when nobody's around is what carries you when everybody's watching. Because it's not about the applause of men, it's about the attention of heaven. And heaven responds to groans. Heaven moves at the sound of surrender. Heaven comes rushing in when you've run out of words, but still choose to lift your voice. So if you've been groaning lately, if you've been sighing in the midnight hour, if you've been crying silent tears, don't you dare think that's wasted. Don't you dare think that's unnoticed. God is collecting every tear. God is translating every groan, and one day you'll look back and realize those wordless prayers carried you farther than eloquence ever could. Because sometimes the most powerful prayer is not what you say with your lips, but what you release from your soul. Family, your groans are not empty. Your groans are not weakness. Your groans are heaven's language spoken through your pain. And if you'll just trust God with those sounds, if you'll just surrender your need for perfect words, you'll discover a God who hears you even when you can't hear yourself. Family, one of the greatest lessons I've learned in walking with God is this: sometimes you have to let an old understanding die so that God can resurrect a new one. And that's exactly what He did with me when it came to speaking in tongues. I used to see it as hype. I used to see it as noise. I used to see it as something people did to prove they were spiritual. That was my understanding. But God said, that old understanding has to die, because I'm about to resurrect something deeper in you. And when it died, when He stripped away my assumptions, when He buried my pride, He gave me a resurrection understanding. Tongues isn't about performance, it's about survival. It's not about hype, it's about healing. It's not about noise, it's about new life, and isn't that just like God? He specializes in resurrection. He doesn't just bring people back from the grave. He brings ideas back. He brings purpose back. He brings identity back. But before he resurrects, he lets something die. He lets your old understanding be buried so that he can raise you up with revelation that will carry you further than you ever thought you could go. That's what he did for me. That's what he wants to do for you. See, resurrection understanding comes when you stop clinging to what you thought you knew. Some of us are so stuck on our traditions, our perspectives, our logic, that we've left no room for revelation. But resurrection doesn't happen in control, it happens in surrender. Jesus had to lay down his life before the Father raised him up. And in the same way, you've got to lay down your old understanding so God can resurrect a new one. I didn't see it at first. When people prayed in tongues around me, I thought, this is extra. I thought it was a show. But then life knocked me so hard that my old understanding couldn't carry me anymore. I had no words left. My English prayers weren't enough. My tears didn't feel like they were reaching heaven. And in that silence, in that dying place, the Spirit rose up with groans too deep for words. That's when I realized, this isn't extra, this is essential. This isn't noise, this is necessary. My old understanding had to die so I could survive, and when it died, God resurrected a new perspective that saved my life. That's what resurrection understanding looks like. It's when you look back at what you thought you knew and realize it wasn't the full picture. It's when you admit, God, I had you figured out wrong in that area. I limited you. I boxed you in. And God, in his grace, doesn't condemn you for it. He resurrects you from it. He says, now that you've let that go, let me show you who I really am. Let me show you what I can really do. And when he shows you, it shocks you. It shifts you. It resurrects something in you that you thought was gone. I want to talk to the one who feels like their understanding of God is stuck, who feels like their faith is flat, who feels like their relationship with him has plateaued. Maybe what you need is not more information, but resurrection understanding. Maybe you need to let go of the God you thought you knew so that he can reveal himself in ways that go beyond your limits. Maybe you need to bury the idea that prayer has to sound perfect, that worship has to look a certain way, that tongues is for them and not for you. Maybe you need to let that die so God can resurrect a deeper intimacy, a deeper power, a deeper revelation in you. Because here's the truth. Resurrection understanding doesn't just change your mind, it changes your life. When Jesus rose, he didn't come back the same. His scars were still there, but his glory was undeniable. He was the same and yet transformed. That's what happens when God resurrects your understanding. You still have the scars from the season where you didn't get it, but now you walk with a glory that says, I've seen God in a new way. I've encountered him beyond my limits. I know him deeper than I did before. That's why tongues isn't just about survival, it's about resurrection. It resurrects your prayer life when words fail. It resurrects your faith when doubt creeps in. It resurrects your hope when despair tries to bury you. Every time you pray in tongues, you're stepping into a resurrection moment where heaven overrides your weakness and breathes new life into you. That's resurrection understanding. So if you've been clinging to old ideas, if you've been resisting what you don't understand, if you've been afraid of what you can't explain, I dare you to let it die. Let your pride die, let your fear die, let your logic die, because on the other side of death is revelation. On the other side of surrender is resurrection understanding. And when it comes, it won't just shock you, it will transform you. Family, hear me. Resurrection understanding means you don't just know about God. You've experienced him in a way that forever changes you. You've seen him in the midnight hour. You've felt him when you had no words. You've heard him when you thought silence was your only companion. And once you've tasted that, once you've walked in that, once you've lived through that, you'll never go back to your old understanding again. Because when God resurrects your understanding, you don't just survive, you thrive. You don't just exist, You live. You don't just repeat words. You release power. That's the kind of understanding that changes everything. That's the kind of understanding that shocks you back to life. That's resurrection understanding.